There is a mistake hiding in one of the most beloved movies ever made. It has been sitting there for over 30 years. Millions of people have watched this film again and again, and most of them never caught it. But once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. And the strangest part? Nobody fixed it. They had the chance, and they left it right there in the final cut. That is not laziness. That is a story worth knowing. Pretty Woman came out in 1990 and instantly became something bigger than a movie. It was a feeling. People fell in love with Vivian Ward and Edward Lewis. They laughed, they cried, they walked out of theaters smiling. The film made nearly $500 million worldwide. It turned Julia Roberts into one of the biggest stars on the planet. It gave people a fairy tale they could actually believe in. So when you hear that this perfect, polished, magical movie has a blooper sitting right in the middle of it, one that was never removed, never corrected, never explained, your first question is simple. How did that happen? Let's start at the beginning, because the blooper does not make sense without the bigger picture first. Pretty Woman was not a smooth production. Behind all the charm and the shopping bags and the fancy hotel rooms, this movie was a mess being held together with hope and last-minute decisions. The original script was nothing like what audiences eventually saw. It was dark. It was sad. It was the kind of story that leaves you sitting quietly in your seat long after the credits roll, not because you felt good, but because you felt heavy. The original version was called $3,000. Named after the amount of money Edward pays Vivian for 1 week of her time. There was no grand romance in it. There was no fire escape ending. There was no fairy tale. It was a raw, uncomfortable look at desperation and survival. Disney came in and changed everything. They wanted warmth. They wanted laughter. They wanted the audience to leave feeling like the world was a beautiful place. So the script was rewritten, the tone was lifted, and what had started as a dark drama slowly became one of the most famous romantic comedies in history. That transformation was not clean or simple. It involved constant changes, reshoots, new scenes, and a lot of improvisation along the way. Entire sections of the film were reworked after shooting had already started. Scenes were filmed multiple times from different angles on different days. Props changed. Lighting changed. Small details shifted without anyone keeping perfect track of everything. And that is exactly how a blooper survives into the final cut. The breakfast scene. That is where it lives. If you watch Pretty Woman carefully during the breakfast scene, you will see something that should not be there. Vivian is sitting across from Edward in his beautiful hotel suite. Room service has arrived. The food is laid out on the table between them. It is a quiet, relaxed moment. Vivian is talking, being her usual bright and charming self. In one shot, she is clearly holding a croissant. You can see it in her hand. It is a croissant. Then the camera cuts away for a second, maybe two, and when it comes back to her, the croissant is gone. In its place is a pancake, a completely different piece of food. Same hand, same position, different breakfast item entirely. That is the blooper, and it was never fixed. Now you might be thinking, okay, so what? A croissant became a pancake. That happens. Continuity errors are everywhere in movies. Someone's coffee cup is full in one shot and half empty in the next. A jacket is buttoned and then suddenly unbuttoned. These things happen all the time, and most people never notice. So why is this one worth talking about? Because of what it tells us about how the movie was actually made. That breakfast scene was not filmed in one smooth morning. It was filmed over an entire day, possibly longer, from multiple angles with multiple setups. Every time the camera moved to a new position, the whole process had to reset. The crew had to arrange the food again, the lighting had to be adjusted, the actors had to come back to where they were emotionally, and everything had to feel natural and spontaneous even though they had already done it 5 or 6 times before. Hot lights, long hours, and real food do not cooperate with each other. A croissant sitting under studio lights for 3 hours does not stay looking like a fresh croissant. It gets sad. It gets flat. It starts to fall apart. So someone on the props team probably grabbed something from the cart that looked close enough and set it on the table. The camera was rolling. Julia Roberts was already deep in the scene. Nobody wanted to stop and say, wait, that was a croissant before, and now it is a pancake. So they kept going. And when the editors sat down to put the scene together, they were focused on the performances, the emotion, the rhythm of the dialogue. They were not thinking about whether the breakfast item matched between shots. The croissant becoming a pancake slipped right past them. But here is where it gets more interesting. This was not the only continuity mistake in that breakfast scene. Watch more carefully, and you will notice the food keeps changing shape throughout the whole scene. The amount on the plate shifts. The arrangement of items moves around. The whole table looks slightly different depending on which angle the camera is shooting from. It is not just one mistake. It is a collection of small ones, all stacked together in a single scene, all pointing to the same thing. This movie was being made fast under pressure, with constant changes happening on and off set, and nobody had the time or the energy to keep track of every single detail. That is actually a remarkable thing when you think about it. Because from the outside, Pretty Woman looks like a polished and carefully crafted film. The clothes are beautiful. The hotel is elegant. The music is perfect. Everything feels like it was planned down to the last detail. But underneath all of that, the production was scrambling. Director Gere was constantly working to hold the tone of the film in the right place, pulling it away from the darkness of the original script and towards something warmer and more hopeful. He was dealing with a script that kept evolving. He was managing two lead actors who were still figuring out their characters. He was shaping a movie that did not fully know what it wanted to be until very late in the process. In that environment, a croissant turning into a pancake is not really surprising. What is surprising is that it became one of the most watched and rewatched scenes in the film. Julia Roberts made that scene work so well that people keep coming back to it. Her energy in those moments, the way she talks with her hands, the way she makes even breakfast feel like an adventure. That is what viewers are actually watching. They are not watching the food. They are watching her. And that is probably why the editors let the mistake go. When you are watching something cut together and every single take has Julia Roberts at her most alive and magnetic, you do not stop the train because of a pancake. There is a bigger lesson inside this story about what makes a movie feel real. The moments in Pretty Woman that people love most are almost always the unplanned ones. The laugh that Julia Roberts did while lying on the floor watching television, that was not scripted in the way it looked. Something happened off camera that made her actually laugh, and the camera caught it. The piano scene where Richard Gere sits down and plays, that was improvised. He made it up in the moment, and it became one of the most memorable scenes in the film. Even the famous jewelry box scene, where Edward snaps the box shut right as Vivian reaches for it, that was unplanned. Richard Gere did it on a whim, and Julia Roberts reacted with genuine surprise. That reaction, that real human moment, is what people remember 30 years later. The breakfast blooper fits into that same pattern. It is a mistake, yes. But it is a mistake that was born from the same energy that made everything else in this movie feel so alive. Things were moving fast. People were reacting to each other in real time. The camera was catching genuine moments instead of perfectly rehearsed ones. And in the middle of all that motion and creativity and chaos, a croissant quietly turned into a pancake, and nobody stopped the magic to fix it. There's also a detail about the movie poster that connects to all of this in a strange way. The iconic image of Pretty Woman, the one everybody knows, the one that was on billboards and VHS covers and magazine pages. That image is not entirely what it looks like. The body in the poster is not Julia Roberts. A model was hired to pose for it, and then Roberts' head was placed on top of the image afterward. The most famous visual representation of this film, the image that sold the movie to the world, was itself a kind of illusion. A beautiful construction put together from different pieces that were never quite what they appeared to be. That is Pretty Woman in a nutshell. The whole film is built on that same idea. Things are not exactly as they seem. The fairy tale has dark roots. The perfect romance came from a sad and ugly script. The polished, glamorous scenes were filmed in messy, scrambled conditions. And right there in the middle of it all, in a hotel breakfast scene that looks completely effortless, is a croissant that somehow became a pancake between shots. Once you know about this blooper, something interesting happens when you rewatch the film. You start noticing other things. The way certain scenes feel slightly different in texture from the ones around them. The moments where you can almost sense that something was adjusted or redone. The scenes that feel completely spontaneous next to the ones that feel more carefully planned. The movie starts to reveal its own history to you, like reading between the lines of a letter. And that makes the film richer, not poorer. Some people hear about bloopers and mistakes and feel like the magic is ruined. Like knowing the trick behind an illusion makes the illusion less wonderful. But with Pretty Woman, the opposite is true. Knowing how messy and fast and chaotic the production was makes the final result feel more impressive, not less. These people made something that has lasted 35 years and still makes audiences emotional. And they did it while scrambling, improvising, rewriting, and apparently not keeping perfect track of which breakfast items were on the table. That is a kind of genius that does not always get enough credit. Gere, the director who guided this film into what it became, was known for that kind of approach. He believed that the feeling of a scene mattered more than the perfect execution of every technical detail. He cared about whether the audience felt something. He cared about whether the actors were alive in their performances. He was not the kind of director who would stop a beautiful, flowing scene because a prop was wrong. If it felt right, it was right. And so the croissant became a pancake, and the scene stayed, and millions of people felt the warmth and charm of that breakfast table without ever noticing that the food had secretly changed on them. The etiquette lesson scene with Barney has its own version of this same kind of mistake. Barney is teaching Vivian about proper table manners, explaining things in a confident, polished way that is meant to make her feel educated about the world of the wealthy. At one point he talks about forks and specifically mentions that a salad fork has a certain number of tines. He says it with complete authority. And then, if you look at the fork actually in his hand, it does not match what he just described. The prop does not line up with the dialogue. Once again, a small detail that contradicts itself right there on screen, and once again, nobody stopped the scene to fix it. What all of these moments have in common is that they were survived by the film because the performances were strong enough to carry the audience past them. People watching, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, were simply not looking at forks and food. They were watching two people slowly fall in love with each other inside a story that somehow felt both completely impossible and completely believable at the same time. That combination is incredibly rare. And it is not something you can manufacture by being technically perfect. Pretty Woman connected with people the way it did because it felt human. And things that are truly human are always a little imperfect. A laugh that comes out too loud. A piano melody made up on the spot. A jewelry box that closes at the wrong moment. A croissant that becomes a pancake. These are not failures of filmmaking. They are evidence of life happening inside the frame. When you look closer at this movie, what you find is not a flawless production that accidentally made a few errors. What you find is a deeply imperfect process that somehow produced something flawless in the ways that actually matter. The ways that make people feel things. The ways that make people come back to watch it again 30 years later. The ways that make a breakfast scene with a continuity error more memorable than most perfectly executed scenes in films that nobody remembers at all. The blooper was never edited out. And maybe, in the end, it never needed to be. Because Pretty Woman was never really about perfection. It was about the gap between what life is and what we wish it could be. It was about two people who were both a little broken, finding something real with each other inside a world full of appearances and arrangements and transactions. It was about the moments that catch you off guard and turn out to mean everything. A croissant turning into a pancake between shots fits right into that story. Look closer at this film, and you will not find a cleaner, simpler movie underneath. You will find something wilder, messier, more surprising, and more alive than the polished surface ever let on. And that is exactly what has kept people watching it for 35 years and counting. The magic was always in the mess.